The first thing anyone noticed about her was not the rifle, or the calm in her eyes, but the way she stood alone on the rise above the road as if she were waiting for a bus rather than a convoy of armored vehicles grinding through dust and heat. And when the SEALs in the lead truck saw her silhouette through the windshield, one of them laughed and said something careless into his mic, because the idea that one woman could matter against 52 highly trained men felt absurd in a world that had taught them to measure strength in numbers, weapons, and volume. Yet the woman did not move, did not raise her voice, did not threaten, and in that stillness lived a history none of them could see, a life shaped not by orders barked in training yards but by choices made quietly when no one was watching, choices rooted in a belief her grandmother once whispered to her during a long night of fear that humanity survives not because we are strong, but because some of us refuse to look away. And as the convoy slowed, unsure whether this was a trap or a misunderstanding, memories flickered through her mind of the road that had led her here, of growing up in a small town where kindness was not a slogan but a daily practice, where neighbors shared water during droughts and grief during losses, where she learned that courage often looks like staying when leaving would be easier. And those lessons followed her into a life of service that never fit neatly into a uniform, because while others trained to dominate, she trained to observe, to protect, to end conflict before it consumed the innocent. And when the smirk on the faces inside the trucks hardened into irritation, she finally lifted her hand, not in surrender or threat, but in a signal only a few would understand, a signal that spoke of restraint, of precision, of control. And in the seconds that followed, the world seemed to hold its breath as 23 soft, nearly soundless interruptions rippled through the air, not explosions, not chaos, but a sudden, unmistakable stillness as engines died and weapons fell useless, and the SEALs, trained to read danger in heartbeats, felt something far more unsettling than fear. They felt surprise, not because they were defeated, but because they were stopped without spectacle, without cruelty, without loss of life. And as they secured their positions and scanned for an enemy that refused to appear, realization crept in that this was not an ambush designed to humiliate, but an intervention designed to protect, because just beyond the bend in the road lay a village they had been ordered to pass through at speed, a village where intelligence had failed to mention a wedding, a market, children running barefoot between tables heavy with food and laughter. And the woman stepped forward now, slowly, deliberately, placing her rifle on the ground as if setting down a burden she had carried for too long. And she spoke, not loudly, not angrily, but with the steady clarity of someone who knows the cost of being ignored, telling them about the village, about the fragile line between mission success and irreversible harm, about how power without compassion becomes something that history judges harshly. And for the first time since their training began, some of the men felt the weight of their own humanity press against the armor of obedience, because they had joined to protect, not to be instruments of unintended destruction. And as their commander listened, really listened, the smirk that had seemed so confident minutes earlier faded into something more complex, something like humility, because it takes a particular kind of strength to stop a convoy with silence instead of force, and a particular kind of courage to stand alone not to win, but to prevent loss. And in that pause, as radios crackled and higher command demanded explanations, the woman's story unfolded in fragments, how she had once been on the other side of such a road, how a convoy that did not stop had changed her life forever, not through malice but through momentum, and how she had vowed that if she ever held the means to intervene, she would use it not to take, but to give time, to give choice, to give others the chance she had lost. And the SEALs, men who had seen the worst and done their best within systems that rarely pause, felt something shift inside them, a reminder that rules exist to serve people, not the other way around, and that true professionalism includes the courage to question when conscience demands it. And so the order came down, quietly, almost unbelievably, to reroute, to wait, to let the wedding finish, to let laughter echo unbroken. And as the convoy turned away, engines restarting with a different weight in their sound, the woman watched until the dust settled, not with triumph, but with relief, because stopping violence is never about proving superiority, it is about preserving possibility. And later, long after reports were filed and the incident reduced to lines of sanitized language, those men would remember the day they were stopped by restraint rather than force, by a stranger who trusted them enough to appeal to their better nature. And some of them would carry that lesson into future choices, pausing where once they would have pushed through, listening where once they would have dismissed, understanding that strength and kindness are not opposites but partners. And the woman would return to her quiet work, unnamed, uncelebrated, content with the knowledge that somewhere a family would remember their wedding not for the sound of engines but for music and joy, and that is how the world changes most often, not through grand victories broadcast to millions, but through moments when someone chooses compassion over certainty, humanity over haste, and stands firm not to defeat others, but to remind them of who they are, leaving behind a ripple of hope that travels farther than any convoy ever could.